Hello everyone, this is Dr. Catalana. The purpose of this video is to introduce Module 4 for our EDCI 595 course. So Module 4 focuses on critical thinking. At this point in the semester, we're shifting from a theoretical focus to more of an application focus. Before I go more deeply into critical thinking, there are a few things I'd like to point out in terms of pre-assessment. This is more related to your previous learning modules. Of course, we had one on pre-assessment and also on instructional grouping. But pre-assessment is such an important concept that I want to make sure that I continuously cover it throughout this entire course. So, of course, the beginning of differentiation is a quality pre-assessment. So it's really not possible to differentiate well if we don't have a base knowledge of where our students are in terms of readiness. Remember, that's academic readiness, but we can also determine their interests and their learning preferences from pre-assessments. So it's important that we ask ourselves, what are we actually measuring? Your previous case study for Module 3 was a very common story that I've heard over and over again. Do we want to use a standardized test as a pre-assessment, or do we want to use one that we made in the classroom? So I want you to constantly be asking yourself, what are you really measuring? Okay? I'm sure that several of you guys have heard of the terms validity and reliability before. They are very commonly illustrated by these three targets here. And I'm going to just quickly review these so that we have a really good knowledge of what we're looking for. Now, on a bullseye, clearly where we want to hit is the center, which is called the bullseye here. So in order to be valid, that means we are measuring what we want to be measuring. In the case of assessment, my favorite example of this is to think of a BuzzFeed quiz. If I decide I really want a career change, am I going to go take a BuzzFeed quiz about which Disney princess would have which job in order to inform my career change? Probably not, right? And the only thing that means is my BuzzFeed test is not really measuring what I should do in terms of a career. Another way of saying that is the BuzzFeed test is not valid. So in order to be valid, it basically means the assessment is measuring what we want it to be measuring. So in target A, this was not a valid shot because none of the shots hit the center of the bullseye. Same thing for target B, no valid shot. And target C, we see, okay, there is validity because we actually hit the bullseye. The next concept we consider is reliability. Reliability can also be thought of as consistency. So think about like a Starbucks drink. Every time you go to Starbucks, no matter where you are, you should get the same drink that tastes the same. That's kind of their business model. So target A has good reliability because it's consistent. It's always the same. That Starbucks mocha is always tasting the same no matter where you are. But it doesn't have good validity because we're not actually hitting the center of the target. Target B has poor reliability. There's not any consistency in the shots. And it has poor validity, right? There's nothing in the center. And then target C has both good validity because we're hitting the center, and it has good reliability. We are consistently hitting the center. So why would I take the time in our course to actually go over these terms? Because validity and reliability are so important. Particularly for gifted education, we have to make sure we are making differentiation and decisions based on an actually valid test, right? So think about it in this case. I wouldn't give my students a BuzzFeed quiz on math which yes, they exist, and then use that BuzzFeed quiz to group my students in terms of academic readiness. However, I could be tempted to be on Pinterest maybe and find my own pre-assessment. Maybe it looks cute. Maybe I use that pre-assessment. But it's almost the same thing if I did not create the assessment itself. So really the key that you're going for in terms of pre-assessment is you want your assessment to be as close to your classroom as possible. In terms of our previous case study, that means we should definitely be using both the pre-assessment that we gave in the class and potentially looking at those ability test scores. So the reason I like to review this slide is it's so often forgotten that differentiation cannot occur without a pre-assessment. We have to know where our students are before we can consider meeting their strengths and challenging them in terms of their needs. Okay, so at this point in the class, you should have a very clear understanding of differentiation. So in terms of the first 3 modules, it's very theoretically based. We talked about how we can differentiate for content, process, and product. Remember, we should always go beyond just content. It's not just challenging content, it's also challenging process and providing choice in that product. And we can differentiate based on our student readiness, interests, and learning profiles. Of course, we don't know that readiness, interest, and profile unless we give a quality pre-assessment. So this is kind of a good graphic to give you an overview of what we have studied thus far. And as I mentioned previously, the course is about to shift. So we've really focused on theory of differentiation and what it really should look like. And now we're going to emphasize practice. So what are we doing with this material? How can you apply it to your own classroom? Okay, so we're not just thinking about idealistic opportunities. I want you thinking from your teacher perspective. Maybe this is a classroom that you can relate to. Maybe you're working with much younger students. But whatever it is, for the rest of this semester, think in the context of your specific classroom. So our next 2 learning modules will focus on critical and creative thinking instructional strategies. This module, of course, focuses on critical thinking strategies. Your first challenge is to complete the differentiation reflection discussion. So this discussion board will be different because you are actually the case study. So after really carefully reviewing the content from modules 1 to 3, I want you to answer the following. First, create a checklist of criteria that you would use to determine quality differentiation. So that could include things like, did it begin with a good pre-assessment? Was flexible grouping used? Go through modules 1 through 3. If you had to summarize in like a checklist, what would be those qualities? And secondly, describe a scenario in which you have made efforts to differentiate in your own classroom. So I'm not looking for the perfect example here. I'm looking for, hey, in my classroom or in my field experience, this is what I have seen. And I want you to explain that scenario very specifically. Then when you go to respond to your classmates' posts, that will look a little bit different as well. First, I want you to reflect on the criteria that your classmates posted for quality differentiation. And then based on that criteria, provide some suggestions on how to improve their differentiated lesson. So this discussion board is much more reflective in nature. It's much more important that you're talking about the application in this case, and then you're practicing giving each other some feedback. From there, you will complete the critical thinking application assignment. Basically, this assignment challenges you to think of that differentiated classroom that you've attempted or that you've seen, and consider how it can be improved by one of the critical thinking strategies that we have discussed. So once again, remember you're shifting focus at this point in the semester. We're shifting from pure theory and we're going much heavier into the application portion. I'm super excited to start this with you, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.